Hello, everyone. We're going to get started. I am Jeff Kaplan from New Living, and I'm also on the board of the Blackwood Educational Land Institute, which is the organization that puts on the Bioneers Conference. This is a really interesting panel. I'm going to quickly introduce it and then turn it over to them. There are not a lot of conversations that take place about how Houston as a city is transitioning to cluster an economy of clean tech and renewable energy companies. And it's partly because there hasn't been a lot, and it's partly because the green community has had so much catch up to do. And we've done an amazing job the last several years of really becoming one of the leading cities in the country for so many things that people think of when they think of green economy. This really represents an opportunity for Houston as a world city to lead and be a model. We are one of the centers, if not the center for energy in the world. And we have people on this panel today that are indigenous to our city who have literally started some of the leading companies in their space in the green energy world, and we need more of them. We need to cluster and incubate and accelerate a community of these types of businesses, and this conversation is so important to how we will get there. And we just hope it plants a bunch of seeds for more entrepreneurs to do what they're doing. So I'm going to turn it over to Leo Gold, who has the new Capital Show and is a financial planner who's going to be moderating the panel, and look forward to a very exciting panel.
So good afternoon to everybody. Thank you very much for spending your Friday afternoon with us here. Thanks to Kath for the great work, and it's great to see so many familiar faces and friends. As Jeff said, I'm Leo Gold. I host the new Capital Show on KPFT 90.1, and my day job, I'm a financial advisor. And we have a terrific panel today. And so why don't we just go down the line and everyone can introduce themselves and tell us who you are. I know who you are, but you can tell everybody here who you are and what you do. And we're going to be talking today. The topic is Houston, from energy capital of the world to energy city of the future. So I think we want to spend some time talking about the Houston aspects of it, the energy aspects of it, the green energy aspects of it. So, Jim, let's start with you down at the far end.
I'm James Calloway, and on the little document it says I'm the chairman of the Center for Houston's Future, which I am. So we're a long-range planning organization for the greater Houston region. I chair that board. So for 12 years I've been working in that area, but I guess more directly germane to the subject at hand. In my day job, I am an entrepreneur and am building right now a lithium carbonate operation in the 14,000 feet in Argentina with my partner Toyota to produce about 20 to 25% of the world's lithium, which of course is a vital component for electric propulsion. So I'm very interested in, that's how I got interested in electric propulsion. And I happened, and Skelly knows this, but I happen to have an identical twin brother who, he should really be the one here, who is one of the co-heads of a large global wind energy development company. So I spent a lot of time listening to him talk about large-scale wind energy, so we jump into that too, because those two things, electric propulsion and intermittent energy, kind of go together in kind of interesting ways.
Okay, before we go to Laverne, the mics are feeding back here just a bit, and we'll have a much more productive panel. There we go. I think that did it.
No, I think that works better, yeah.
Okay, let's go on. Laverne, you're next. Tell everybody about what you're up to.
I'm Laverne Williams. I'm an architect. I founded Environment Associates, Architect Consultants, all the way back in 1975, and it's a green architecture firm striving for sustainability in everything we do. The background with the energy industry goes back to the 70s when I was an advisor to the governors and the Energy Advisory Council, and I helped found the Houston Solar Energy Society and the Texas Solar Energy Society, and founding member of the Texas Renewable Energy Industries Association. And so I've got a long history in this. I can't say that the renewable energy area is as far as the technology is concerned, I'm not involved in that. to any great degree anymore. My involvement is more on the passive design of buildings and so forth, so that we are using the least amount of energy possible and are engaged in massive conservation efforts. So we're trying to save energy and not use it.
Good.
Okay, next is Laura Spangen from City of Houston. Laura, it's all yours.
Great, thank you. I'm Laura Spangen. I'm the Sustainability Director for the City of Houston. I work for Mayor Anise Parker. And we're trying to save energy at the city and also use renewable energy. It's a little known fact, but something we're very, very proud of. Houston is actually the largest municipal purchaser of renewable energy in the country. So 33% of all the energy that powers our city buildings comes from wind, mostly from wind farms in West Texas. And we're actually looking at increasing that to 50% in 2013. So half of all of our energy will be renewable energy credits that will power our buildings. So we're very excited about that. We do some things around solar, less around solar, because really there's not as many incentives in this state. Really, Texas is the leader in wind, and California is the leader in solar. But we are doing some interesting things, which maybe I could talk about in a little bit, particularly with some major partners like University of Houston. When we're also, while we care about where our energy comes from, since we use so much energy in the city of Houston, we also really care about trying to reduce our energy usage. And we have had a very comprehensive energy efficiency program over the last couple of years, where we have done energy efficiency improvements in a ton of city buildings, almost 100 city buildings now. And our next tranche of buildings will be Houston's libraries, where we're going to do energy efficiency improvement in about 20 libraries in Houston. So we pay these back. The money that we spend gets paid back through the energy savings. And we have guaranteed energy savings. So companies actually guarantee the savings that they say they're going to meet. And if they don't, they actually have to pay us money. So it's been a great program for Houston, and lots of other cities have kind of modeled their programs on what we're doing here. So that's just a little bit about some of the energy things that we're focused on. Also, later on, as James talked about, electric cars. We've had a very great program around electric cars and actually buying electric cars into our city fleets. We're actually one of the first cities in the U.S. to do that. We can talk a little bit more about that later. But I'm just really happy to be here, and I see so many faces that I know in the audience, which is great, and new faces, and just excited about having a dialogue today. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. Next is Michael Skelly. Michael is with Clearline, and he's going to tell you all about what he's up to. Thanks, Michael.
I'm also I guess an environmental entrepreneur of sorts, and started off, the first company that I was involved in was I ran a company in Costa Rica, and we built something called the Rainforest Aerial Tram. And this is back when canopy tourism was getting invented, and we kind of helped invent it. But we built a ski lift that takes people on a mile-long tour of the canopy of the rainforest in Costa Rica. And then I got involved in renewable energy and worked for a couple of companies, some of which panned out, some of which did not pan out. And then I came to Houston in the late 90s to get into wind, and this was right when wind was taking off in the US, and worked with the Zilka family for a good few years when it wasn't really clear that wind made any sense at all, but it turned out that it did, and costs came down, and people began to recognize the importance of this energy resource. And that company, now called EDPR, has several hundred employees here in town and several $1 billion of wind farms around the country. And after that, I tried my hand at politics and learned that I'm not sure what I learned. I guess
You ran for...
I ran against John Culberson in District 7. And what is the expression? Experience is what you get when you don't get what you wanted. So I had a really good experience. And then shortly thereafter started Cleanline, and what we're trying to do is develop a series of very long distance, ultra high voltage transmission lines from the central windy parts of the country to strong interconnection points in the TVA system, Chicago, Southern California, et cetera. So we're slogging it through all the regulatory, permitting, right-of-way acquisition, technical studies, et cetera. And we learn new things every day. Most people, sometimes we think we got a really brilliant idea, and sometimes we think we're out of our minds. But that's what I do. And then by night and weekends, I'm up to my eyeballs in bayous and greenways, and worked with lots of folks, including a number of folks in the room here, on Proposition B, which hopefully y'all voted for, but we passed overwhelmingly, 68 to 32%, yay! To fund a build-out of greenways along all of Houston's bayous. So that's kind of my sideline when I'm not thinking about. So linear infrastructure is kind of my thing: transmission lines, trams, greenways, whatever.
Thank you for introducing yourselves and telling us all what you're up to. Clearly, we have 4 people who are way out ahead of the status quo and thinking, and not just thinking, but acting on behalf of the future. So I think the first question that I want to start with is maybe asking each of you to tell us, where would you like this city to be 20 years from now? Just take a second and let's do a thought experiment. Tell us what you want the place to look like, ideally. What would you want to see Houston look like 20 years from now? Laverne, it looks like you're chomping at the bit on that one.
I do have some thoughts on that, because I'm not satisfied with Houston being the energy capital of the world or the energy city of the future. To me, that is not a good enough goal. I would like to see us create a much larger goal as becoming maybe the sustainable city of the future, or the sustainable city of the world, where we can excite the whole populace instead of the energy companies, as far as creating a world that will be there for everyone, and everybody can prosper and benefit from it. Not that we won't from being the energy capital, but I think it has a lot more. It's a lot more worthwhile, and we have the perfect place to do that here in Houston. We can someone was this morning in a session was saying that on food back 50 years ago, we were the major exporter of food in the nation, right here out of Houston. And I can see how that could have been the case. And we have the perfect climate for producing more than enough food for our own selves here, for capturing all our own rainwater, but staying on the energy standpoint. We in transitioning with everything that's being done from a fossil fuel will be all the part of the mix, but it will be a broad mix of energy use, and renewable energy is a big picture in that. Our main focus has been upon, like I mentioned, about having, and we're striving for sustainability. We completed the first LEED Platinum project any place on the planet. We were the architects for that, and so we are constantly striving to push the envelope on where we can take people who want to really go in that direction. So I think we need a bigger vision, is what I'm trying to say.
James Calloway, what about you? What do you want the city hope the city will look like 20 years from now? Describe it to us, because obviously, if we're going to start something, we want to know where we're going to end up.
Spend a fair amount of time trying to think about that. It's always difficult to look out 20 years and know what all the dynamics are, but there are a few things that we do know about 20 years from now. I mean, we do know a lot about the changing demographic character of our city. It's going to create a terrific opportunity for us, but it also has some perilous consequences for failure to properly address the human factors in our community, lack of adequate education, lack of adequate medical care, et cetera, which does not lend itself to having the kind of city that would allow us to, really take full advantage of sustainability and kind of place we'd like to be. I mean, my fear is that 20 years from now, if we're not careful, we're going to enclave into the haves and have-nots in a way that is very destructive. So we really have to concentrate a great deal of attention onto the human capital development side of this. And unfortunately, I personally believe that means we're going to have to change political leadership in Austin in order to achieve it, because they're simply not going to let it happen. And I really wish that wasn't the case, and I didn't mean to be political, but I just think that in the end, that's just our reality. So then the second part would be sort of the physical concepts for the region. And I tend to think, I'd like to think that we could take advantage of the benefits of density and urbanization to reshape the nature of where we are, because it has so many benefits, both in terms of opportunity for energy conservation, for quality of life, for supporting the kinds of creative things that make for an exciting place, and I think just a better place for people to live. And I spent a lot of time in Toronto, for instance, and I deeply admire whatever the hell they're doing, because the density that's coming up there is transforming that great city, and I think we could learn a lot from that. So I'm hoping that we do that. My guess is that we won't be able to do it in the kind of Toronto-ish model, but probably sort of at best kind of a hub and spoke concept with sort of pods of density. And obviously I think that one of the benefits would be to make it so that people aren't absolutely destroying their health and their lives by spending 2 or 3 hours, in traffic jams, and bring work and life into closer proximity. I think those are a couple of things that, there are many other things, but those are certainly some of the big things that I think about.
Yeah.
Laura, what about you? You spend a lot of time working on these issues now for the city, and I'm assuming that you spend a lot of time thinking about these issues as well, and where we're headed, and where do you want to see us 20 years from now? Where would you hope that we'll be, and what will it look like?
Well, to riff off of what James said, I think that I really feel right now it's actually this kind of momentous time in Houston. There's so much energy around really thinking through what our future is going to be and how to have people really enjoy their quality of life. And I think more and more, and for those of you in the room that follow Dr. Stephen Kleinberg, who has done a survey of Houston's opinions for 30 years. And he's tracked, all these opinions from, do you support gay marriage? Do you like transit? How do you get to work? Tons of opinions. And the one thing that he's tracked for 30 years is where would you rather live? Would you rather live in a more suburban area or a more urban area? More density, sort of more inner city. And for the first time in 30 years, this year, more people said they actually want to live in a more urban area than in a more suburban area, which I think is huge for Houston. Yes. And it's, it barely, won, it barely goes more, but that's okay. And I think people are really starting to realize that their quality of life is important, that they don't want to spend time in a car, that they do want to live closer to where they work and they play and they shop and they go to school and they eat. They want more cultural amenities. They want restaurants. They want small businesses to thrive. They want thriving small neighborhoods, small businesses in neighborhoods. They want to be able to walk to places. They want to be able to bike to places. And so we have this kind of momentum that I think is starting. But then there's also those that are I think, scared of it and still want the status quo and still believe that our growth is sort of about becoming, is growing out as opposed to up. And so there's a real push-pull right now, I think, on many issues. And I, hope that in 20 years, that the sort of, density, transit-oriented development, small neighborhoods, walking, biking, getting around, with public transit, living closer to where you work and play, that is sort of how our city grows. And I think we can get there, but it's definitely not going to be easy, and we're seeing struggles on certain issues, like literally today. But just on the city side, I just want to touch on, because that's really what I spend my most time on, how can the city of Houston affect things that impact your lives in 20 years? And we're actually just starting on a climate action plan or sustainability plan for the city. We actually don't really have a plan. We have a sort of half a plan where we know where our greenhouse gas emissions come from, but we don't really have actions and recommendations and goals. So that's sort of the second half of the plan that I'm working on. And so I'm sort of actively thinking, in 20 years, where do we want to be? And for us, we're thinking big. We have a small bike share program right now. Well, in 20 years, I want there to be 2,500 bikes in that bike share program, right? I want every major neighborhood to have bike share. We want our air quality to be better. We don't want to be in the top 10 worst cities for air quality. We want to have, electric cars in our fleet. We want, half of our fleet to be electric cars or hybrids. I do a lot of work on food issues, food deserts, and local food. So we just launched a garden program using Houston's public land, which we've never actually used our public land for vegetable gardens in neighborhoods, and now we're able to do that. So I want 150 gardens to be grown in neighborhoods using our public land. So I'm thinking from a sustainability perspective of big picture goals that I think we can get there if we have the right leadership on a lot of the issues that I think people in this room care about.
Do we have the right leadership?
I think we do today, and I hope that we continue to have the right leadership in the future.
Michael Skelly, what about you? What do you hope the city will look like 20 years from now? What do you think it will look like? What will people experience as they live here in Houston 2 decades from now?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I go back and forth on this, and sometimes it just makes my head explode. And then sometimes I go, wow, we can really do cool stuff. So, and I think probably most people in the room have the same impression, that I worry a little that in general, quality of life in Houston is, in terms of, urban amenities and things like that, is getting a little better, and it's better than it was 10 years ago. But if you look at our competitor cities, and I just can't go to Greater Houston Partnership meetings anymore, because it's just, they talk about like this is the Garden of Eden all over again. And it just makes me crazy, because you go, all right, so yes, relatively, we're doing better than 10 years ago. But compared to our peer cities, okay, they're moving in the right direction a lot more quickly than we are. Okay, a lot more quickly. And so that's the question that I sort of ask myself, is how are we going to, like, I thought, man, I was so excited about this bond issue, and, we won 68-32, and then Joe Turner at Parks and Recreation, he started sending me the results of other ballot measures around the country. Bigger numbers in terms of passage, and bigger dollar amounts allocated to parks and quality of life stuff. And I went, oh, well, I'm still excited about what we got done. But it does sort of reinforce this sort of, are we keeping up in relative terms? And I don't think it's and I think a lot of us take this quite personally, because we're involved in it and, we're excited about it. But I do worry that we may not keep up in the way that we should.
I can get all of you incredibly depressed very easily. Just, it's so easy, it hurts. And I have a propensity to think about all the dark, evil things that could happen, because it's the nature of a businessman is to think about risk. But, the one thing that gives me some optimism about the Houston region is that maybe it's because I've been here since I was 4 years old, and I'm 55, so that makes me an old guy that's been here forever. You know, as recently, I'd say, as 10 or 15 years ago, I really think that the awareness, literally even the awareness of the importance of the term quality of life or sustainability in and again, let's just call it the power brokers, the power elite, okay, that have undue influence on things. They couldn't care less about it. Honestly, it was just irrelevant. And there began to be a conversation. It's a tough conversation, but there began to be a pretty active conversation about 10, 12 years ago about that issue. And I believe that today, in fairness to the partnership and other groups like that, which I happen to be on the executive committee of the partnership, so I guess I get to see it on the inside. I do think that there's a pretty substantial group who now no longer say that, you know, the issue of sustainability, the issue of the environment, the issue of how we develop our urban centers, et cetera, is irrelevant. I really think that they are becoming more outliers, the ones that don't care. I think, though, that we have an issue. But let me just finish the one point. But there is a problem with economic interests that are in sort of the development community who mightily benefit from building ever larger rings around our city, which we should have avoided with all cost. It was a terrible strategic error to allow that next ring to go. We shouldn't have even had the one we already had, much less another one. And there are huge economic interests at work that are antithetical to some of the things we should be doing. So I don't want to suggest, I'm not mamsy-pamsy that, you know, everybody's lined up, but I am saying to you, for hope purposes, that the dialogue and the understanding has gotten better over the last 10 years, and I think that the trajectory is good for the leadership, business leadership, which has an undue influence in this region on this issue. That's my point of optimism.
I mean, I think that's great. I think one of the things that I've realized, kind of being probably the newest person in Houston on this panel, what is hard is that I feel like when we come, whoever said human capital, I feel like the people that care about these issues and sort of want those things to change, that number of people working on those issues is small compared to the people that either don't care or are working against. And that's the one thing that if there could be a takeaway in this room, if everyone could become like an agent of change, I would say that's so important because when it's almost like when you think of like cool CEOs like Michael Skelly, you can't really come up with like lots and lots of them in Houston, like there's really not that many that bike to work or, care about, a proposition about our parks. I mean, so that's what I think I'm worried about when I think of Houston's future. I think, like I said, I think there's momentum and I think it's a real interesting time right now and I think we can go forward or we can go back. But to go forward, I think we're going to need more people working on these issues and more people who have power, not just, average citizens. We need more people in positions of power that care about where our city's going and that can make decisions to get us there. And that, to me, is where we need to figure out how to get more resources.
So following up on that, Laura, James and Michael, let me ask the two of you, where will the leadership come from?
Well, actually, I had a question for James on that topic. And so the way these things sort of happen is, let's just continue to pick on the Greater Houston Partnership. And I love Tony Chase and all that stuff. But you go, okay, the way these organizations work is via consensus, okay? And today the consensus is, now there are voices of dissent and people are like, God, why are we doing some of this stuff? This is, You know, if you in the Grand Parkway is a good kind of litmus test. So there's kind of grumbling, like, oh my gosh, why do we do that? And
Right.
why are we supporting that? But the consensus is, hey, we're a consensus-driven organization. Let's support the dang thing, right? When do the voices of sort of of sort of sustainability or a different way of looking at things, when does that balance shift? Is that 10 years from now, or 20, or 5, or?
Well, I think to some extent that has to do with some vigilance on our part. One of the problems that we, I think, face, and I've probably be criticized heavily for saying this, but in some of these structures, some of these, like the partnership structure, there's been undue influence on the part of special interest inside the committee structures, which drive the policy to the board, which really is basically rubber stamping what's happening. And so, you know, if you look, we should be paying a lot more attention to who's on the committees, who are in the leadership of those committees. And a lot of times you have people who have very clear Robert Moses kind of clever capabilities.
He lives on in Houston.
Yes, and so I think vigilance in this regard is very important. But I do think this, I think they're becoming fewer and fewer people who are just absolutely like they were 10 or 15 years ago. And that's the bright spot,
Okay.
Scully.
All right. Okay, I want to shift from the Greater Houston Partnership
Yeah.
for just a moment.
Good.
And the first question I asked was to tell everyone about your, if not vision, what your thoughts, hopes are about the way the city will look 20 years from now. This is an energy panel. So this question is, what does energy have to do, and alternative energy even more specifically, have to do with that future vision that you all have talked about?
Yeah, so this is something, this is a good question. So, renewable energy, which, you know, I happen to think is going to be more and more important in the future because of all the issues that we're all familiar with. It's interesting to sort of compare the energy content of renewable energy to the energy content of other forms of energy. So if you get a barrel of oil or an MCF of gas or a little pellet of uranium or a ton of coal, there's a lot of energy embedded in that stuff. I mean, like a ton of solar stuff piled up and then buried in the earth. And so it's very concentrated forms of energy. So the infrastructure that you need to get it out of the ground and move it around and combust it or whatever you do with it there's a lot of infrastructure that goes into that. But in comparative terms, renewable energy, you actually need a lot more infrastructure to get it and to harness it and to move it. So a wind turbine, now people may not like hearing this, but a wind turbine that's sort of a ship of the line, 1.5 megawatts, can power 300 homes, you know, forever, as long as it's up there. But one well in the Gulf of Mexico is like a humongous amount of energy, dramatically more than many, many, many wind turbines. So what does that mean? That means that for renewable energy, and the two sort of forms that are, you know, probably I think our best hope are solar and wind. You need a lot of this stuff because the energy is really dispersed, and sunshine is quite dispersed, and wind energy is quite dispersed. So you need these massive gathering apparatus to collect it and then concentrate it and then move it around via wires. So what does that have to do with Houston? This is a city that's actually quite good at infrastructure projects. And, you know, you've got logistics companies that if you call them right now, they'll put an oil rig in Angola for you, you know, like in a month, no problem. If you want a pipeline laid coast to coast, they'll do it for you. If you want to deploy a ton of equipment in the Persian Gulf for some reason, that too can happen. So we're really good at logistics and infrastructure and engineering and so on, and that's what it's going to take to do a lot more renewable energy. So for our organization, we deal with engineering and right-of-way and legal and big project finance and logistical stuff, and right here in Houston we got all the people and all the companies that we could ever want. So I think Houston is actually well positioned if we get we do need to get this sort of quality of life stuff down. Otherwise, people will say, you know, this is great, but we can do all this exciting stuff, but let's do it from Denver, where they're really investing in their city and trying to create a city that's, you know, a nice place to live.
So you're speaking to the existing industrial and corporate infrastructure here in Houston and its ability to play a major role in the rollout of this tremendous infrastructure that's needed in sustainable energy.
Absolutely, and they're well positioned to do it, and some of them are, you know, quite involved in it already. It's interesting. I was talking to a guy.
So give us some maybe examples of companies you know of or work with, people who understand the point that you're making and are taking steps.
Well, I don't know that they're thinking it through all that much. They're going, hey, there's opportunities in renewable energy. Let's chase them down. I mean, I don't know that it's.
Exxon and Algae or
Yeah.
does have a wind division. I mean,
yeah, I mean, it's not an accident that of the, for example, the wind energy companies, the top 10, you know, half of them either have a major headquarters, a major presence here, or a headquarters, or whatever. A lot of them are right here in town.
Right. I think, though, that what it feels like sometimes to me is that it's still very much considered a, you know, something that they are. I don't want to say greenwashing, but I think that it's not a main part of their business, some of these major companies. That it is a very much, you know, sort of much smaller part of their business, or if they are doing research in something, you know, that's more cutting edge, that's where it stays. It just kind of stays in R&D, and it never really becomes part of, you know, sort of the operations or something that they're implementing. And I think that, you know, is hopefully will change as, you know, more and more we realize we need to have a diverse portfolio. We need to have more resources. Again, I mean, you know, no one's sort of has brought up the word climate change yet, and I think it does play a role in this. I mean, for the first time, and I kind of laugh, right? It's like, you know, Houston has been through a number of hurricanes, and the rest, you know, lots of states have been through, you know, a bunch of tornadoes that they never had tornadoes, and we've had a drought when no one thought we were going to have a drought, and other cities have flooded, and when they've never flooded, but until New York had a hurricane, you know, it really wasn't nothing else really mattered. Until New York had it, then there was climate change possibly, and then we had to deal, you know, then, oh my God, something's going on with the weather, we better address it. And, you know, that's okay, it's New York. And I appreciate that climate change is on the front page of the New York Times now, that, you know, Bloomberg endorsed Obama really because of his, you know, what he thinks he's going to do on climate change. So, you know, it took a tragedy to unfortunately get us to realize that there is something going on in the largest city in the United States. But you know, at least there is a silver lining to that. So the more that people realize that we have to kind of think differently about how we use our resources, I think if Houston can be at the forefront of that, just like Michael said, we do have the capability. We are a city of engineers. We are a city of doers. We are a city we know how to build infrastructure. We know how to get stuff done. So many major corporations are headquartered here. God, that is part of like what would make us a forward-thinking city, is if we can think differently about resources and use all the talent that we have. The second thing, though, I will say, and Michael just sort of touched on it, but I feel it in a bigger way because lots of people will talk to me about it, is that to attract new minds, right? To attract young new minds that want to work on these creative or new technologies, we do have to go back to what we talked about earlier, quality of life. We have to create a city that they want to live in. Because I mean, it is, you know, more people want to live in New York, Chicago, LA, and some of these other cities than they do want to live in Houston. More people do not think of Houston right now as a place they really, really want to live in. And that's a problem when it comes to us being a leader in some of this new technologies, because if we can't get the smart people here, the younger smart people here to do this work, then it's not going to matter.
Laverne,
Yeah.
this question again, and in the areas and the level that you're working, this question of this vision that you laid out earlier for the city 20 years from now that you hope comes into existence, what does energy have to do with it? With fulfilling that vision, what is the alternative energy importance toward getting into that future?
Well, the fossil fuel age, you know, the Earth is about 5 billion years and old, and about 175 years, I think, is about the life of the fossil fuel age, you might say, and that's just a blip in the overall scheme of things as far as the planet Earth is concerned. And if we aren't thinking about what we're going to be doing when fossil fuels, you know, pass the age of fossil fuels, and then we need to be thinking about that, and basically how do we create a sustainable society and a sustainable Houston. The renewable energy, there's enough. Houston has this tremendous potential for using solar. The problem is the storage more than anything else. You know, the sun shines during the daytime. There's enough energy from the sun that hits the earth in 1 hour to power all the total energy used to the earth for 1 year worldwide. And by focusing our attention, I think more than anything else, is away from fossil fuels that are contributing to climate change, to a way of life that focuses upon not emitting carbon into the atmosphere, where we can have a sustainable future, I think is something we could get buy-in from. So that if we start, well, we have been doing it, and other cities are doing it, what's so frustrating about Houston is we have all this potential, and there's not a whole lot being done. You know, and that's what I'm trying to do, is just let people know that there is a huge potential out there.
Well, let me just pick up on several things that have already been said. I mean, first of all, I think Skelly's exactly right. And that is that Houston's not really, I don't even consider it to be much of, it's a bit player in research and development in the area of energy. And look, I know I'm pissing off somebody at the Material Sciences Department at the Nano Center at Rice, but the truth is, you know, we're pikers in that, but we really are outstanding, truly globally outstanding in the capacity to convert technology that has been developed into large-scale power, and which is critical. And as Michael pointed out, you know, when you start trying to do large-scale renewable energy, it's a big-time engineering, construction, project management, operations issue, and we're really good at this. And by the way, there's a surprising amount of it going on in Houston, which is rarely talked about. I happen to know about it because my twin runs one of the larger ones quietly that nobody's ever heard of, but doing about $3 billion in wind projects right now. So you could go to his 24-hour control center here in Houston and meet with all of his people to blow your mind. It's like being at NASA. And
yeah, it's interesting that in the control rooms that are downtown,
yeah,
you got about 25-30% of the installed wind in the U.S.
Yeah, is being controlled in downtown Houston right now, and nobody even knows about it. So I think it's really quite an interesting story. Now, the biggest issues with, in my judgment anyway, with the renewable story, one is, of course, just continued pressure to bring down costs so that it doesn't require so much subsidy. I think that's got to happen, and it is happening, by the way. But I think that the other problem is the intermittent nature of it. And that's why I got so interested and involved in electric propulsion, is because it's very interesting if you just reflect for a minute that, for instance, in West Texas, where, you know, part of the larynx of the United States sits out there in West Texas, the only problem is that the wind, damn it, it blows off peak. It primarily blows off peak. And so how in the world do you store that energy? And so, you know, because if it's still blowing and the turbines are out there, but if you can't store the electricity, well, tough stuff. And so there's this really interesting distributive power storage opportunity for the world, in my opinion, through electric propulsion. I mean, I just want you all to know, this week, I have not used any gasoline, and I'm not on a bicycle like Skelly. You can tell from how much stomach fat I have. But I'm driving a plug-in Prius. You know, I've got one of the experimental, you know, first 5,000. Fabulous. I didn't miss my gasoline this week. I drove everywhere I wanted.
Bike for it.
Huh?
Traded a bicycle for it.
Yeah. So I think that, you know, that there's a wonderful marriage opportunity between electric propulsion and building up our capacity in this area. There are two other things that I'll stop on Houston that I think are maybe specific to Houston. One is, I do think that our city is psychologically or intellectually falling behind the rest of the competitors in adopting the idea of anthropogenically induced global climate change. I think that we're deniers. We're way overly populated with deniers. We're not so much denying that there's something funny going on, but we really are having a big problem adopting the idea that we have anything much to do with it, okay? And I think that puts us at a slight disadvantage in sort of creating public policy here that is enlightened. And a lot of other cities have really moved past us on this. I think it's a terrible problem. And then the last thing that's specific to Houston that I think we have to kind of grapple with, it's by the way, this is a good news, bad news story here. It has to do with hydraulic fracturing of energy. Because if we had not had this advent of horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing, the domestic United States oil and gas industry would be in the utter toilet. And by the way, our economy would have been in hell of a problem. We would have had a hell of a problem because we would not have made any credible transition to maintain this energy presence in the overall economy. So we actually got our runway extended to be the energy center of the world with this hydraulic fracturing technology. That saved us. Okay, nobody wants to talk about it. But it also put us into perpetual delay in having to come up with an alternative view about ourselves as the energy capital of the world. Okay, so I do think that it's this yin and yang thing that I'm struggling with. And Michael, I don't know if you think I'm nuts on that, but something I think about.
Well, there is a lot of, just following up on that, there is other things going on that I don't think much, and I'm not sure how much credence I can put on it either, but there is research going on and proposals being put forth. Like just this last 2 weeks ago, I got this from one of the co-founders of the Houston Solar Energy Society. It's about space-based power, the solar power. And from the NASA, you know, he was with NASA, all these people, and he's still what they've done is that the group of these people down at NASA have come together to redo a proposal that was done back in the 70s, or actually the 80s, and to put it into a modern context about space-based solar power being a viable solution to the storage problem, because we can put the collectors up there above the atmosphere where they have solar energy beamed on them of 24 hours a day and being down to earth. It's just a huge project. It's hard to wrap your head around.
The only
that.
problem is it won't happen in any of the persons in this room's lifetime. I mean, you know, I spent the first 10 years of my life trying to build a private space station with the head of engineering at the Johnson Space Center, and almost did it and built a space company. And, you know, there's been hallucinations about that for a long, long time going on. And I just personally, you know, think that we need to hang in the terrestrial-based solutions for now. I mean, at least in all of our lifetimes.
So that means, so my initial concept about vastly cutting down our waste, our use of energy. I mean, not necessarily not our use of energy, but vastly cutting down, you know, increasing the efficiency of how we use it.
Well, Scott Ziegler, one of my good friends who builds a lot of the great, you know, one of the big builders of all these high-rise, he always tells me, oh, come on, James, you know, per square foot, you know, when you have high-rises, you lose 80% less energy per foot in a high-rise, a modern high-rise versus individual homes. Well, you know, I mean, that gets back to density, you know.
Okay. So, Michael, you're working in one of these areas that we hear about that is problematic, the area of transmission. And the fact that we have wind that blows out there, but we need it here, and sun that shines out there, and we need it, you know, over there.
Yep.
And James, you're working in this area with it's also problematic. Storage. How do we store it? We need it now, not then, or then, not now. What role does the city of Houston have to play in these areas? Obviously, you're playing your own roles. You've talked about the engineering capabilities that we have here. But what sort of role can the city play in overcoming these hurdles that we face in alternative energy and sustainable energy?
Well, I think that the things that Laura outlined, like increasing purchases of renewable energy, which often save you money, so that's kind of a no-brainer. Trying to figure out electric fleets like y'all are doing. I mean, I sort of don't. Are we saying city like city of government, or
the city broadly?
Citizens of
the city broadly, but I think that it's great that you brought in the city government, and should the city government, which Laura's indicated is playing a role, should the city government be playing more of a role in helping your business or helping your business, or
you know, I don't. You know, what was the expression? I'm from the government, and I'm here to help you. I really appreciate like what the city does in terms of encouraging folks to be more sustainable, to green up their buildings, to make the city more livable. The best thing the city can do is make the city more livable, and then we can attract talent and lower. And you know, we're good capitalists, so if there's a big talent pool out there, then we can be more effective as a business. That's really what I would ask of the city. And, you know, make smart business decisions like let Southwest Airlines serve the city, because then we get some competition, and that's going to hold down fares. Just things like that are what I think folks like me care about the most. And then also to James's point on, you know, I can't remember exactly how you said it, that we have you know, we got a lot of deniers out there. I think the danger there is the brand, and if you hurt the brand of the city, then people won't want to live here or move here. They say like, oh my gosh, like Houston, you want me to like take a job in Houston, and you know, what am I going to tell my spouse? And no, there's no way. It's that place is full of crazy people, and that's an issue, you know. So we need to encourage
Other voices.
other voices to like, hey, like tone it down a little here, guys, because you know, you can really hurt the brand of the city, and that's I think pretty important as well.
James, what about my question? Or Laverne, or
Yeah, maybe Laura.
Yeah, I mean-
or Laura, this question of assistance from the city, whether it's the government or other corners of the city.
Right, I
What
mean-
is the role? What about building codes
Yeah.
playing a role?
I mean,
Obviously.
traditionally, you know, I mean, a lot of cities do take a very active role. Either they're leading by example, providing incentives, or passing, you know, requirements for the private sector to do things, right? Houston traditionally has led by example, hasn't done as much around incentives or requirements or mandates, you know, legislation. So, you know, and that's fine. I think there's this understanding that, you know, in Houston, you know, that you provide carrots and then they'll do the right thing. And on some level that has worked in certain areas, and in some areas it hasn't. But I think the way I view, you know, let's just say my tenure at the City of Houston is 5 years. The way I view a 5-year plan on any topic that I'm working on, let's take, you know, green buildings, for example. I think that the first couple of years are really educating folks, working with folks, giving them tools, trainings, information, you know, lauding them when they do well, having voluntary programs, you know, getting them to talk to the mayor if that's what they want, whatever it is that they need to do the right thing. Then as you do all those things, then you show them the benefits. You show them the savings because they've, you know, reduced the energy usage in their building, and they've reduced the water usage, and they've attracted more young people because they have a platinum LEED building. And you show them the benefits of that, and then you can get, in the last few years, you can get to incentives and legislation. And for example, on green buildings, we're doing that right now. There's been a lot of work with the private sector on greening buildings, and a lot of it's voluntary, and we're actually one of the leaders. We are number 4 in the country right now for the number of LEED certified buildings we have, and we have no mandates. All the cities above us, Chicago, et cetera, they have mandates. They have legislation requiring buildings to be LEED certified. We don't, okay? But other cities are starting to almost take us over, so we have to stay competitive. So to do that, we're looking at legislation. We're actually looking at requiring public disclosure of energy usage in your building. We're looking at requiring buildings to do an audit of their energy every 5 years, and then hopefully do the work to reduce their energy usage. So we actually are looking now at pieces of legislation to require people to do stuff. And that's kind of how I view, you know, the city, at least the City of Houston, in my opinion, is lead by example first. Buy electric cars into your fleet, green your buildings, do energy efficiency, build vegetable gardens, launch bike share, you know, build bike lanes, do those things, show people what can be done, show them the benefits, show them that people want these things, and then as that kind of sinks in, right, to the culture, then you start actually working on legislation and requiring people to do them, require recycling, require, you know, water conservation, et cetera. So that's kind of my worldview on how a city government should work, particularly in a city like Houston.
Can I have one thing, and Laura has heard me rant about this before, but one thing that I think we as a city are awful at, absolutely horrifically awful, is how we design streets and how we don't put in sidewalks and how that we hardwire this place for automobiles and only for automobiles. That's right. And it makes for a dramatically lower quality of life. And that's a big topic to tackle, but if we don't get that right, then we can do a lot of other things right, and it won't make up for that egregious error. And, you know, I know that there's good things hopefully going to happen in that regard, but if there was one thing, if there was one switch you could pull, it would be a little lever over at Public Works that sort of changed all the design standards and all that stuff.
Well, I'd like to say something about the city as far as the incentives and so forth. They haven't stood in the way of green building. I mean, they've actually facilitated it here by their policies and so forth. It's a great place to be. You know, the whole building department has been encouraging, you know, cutting edge. You know, and we're literally, all we got to do is just show them what we're going to do, and literally we can do about anything we want to, as long as the quality of life and people's health and safety aren't impacted. You know, you may have to prove it on a building or two to get it done, but once you're through that, then it's better sailing. But you know, the city should just create the climate for their role is to create a climate where this can take place, and they've been doing that. But we do have some big challenges, and Mike put up one.
So we've got about 15 minutes left. Is that right? We're going to wrap up around quarter after. So I think maybe this will be the last question. Maybe we'll open it up to questions from the audience. If you could blink your eyes and kind of handpick leadership in this area, maybe it's people or maybe it's places that you would be picking leaders of the present or the future from, where would that be? Who would that be to lead in this area? Because I think the panel, if I was to sum it up, is painting a picture of kind of, we're making some progress, but it's very slow. There may be a gap widening between the city of Houston and other cities. We're not going fast enough. We've got built-in entrenched interests whose financial interests actually are contrary to making some of these changes. And that goes into the companies themselves and into the large commercial partnerships. So where would you, if you could grab some people, be grabbing them from? James Callow, let's start with you.
James, I have no idea. You know, I guess, you know, I really don't know. But the only thing I guess what I would say is I'm a little bit more optimistic about the youth than the old people like me. You know, I do think that, you know, I think about my daughters and, you know, I mean, they're just like rabid dogs about all this stuff. You know, they can't even envision a world that wouldn't be, they want it. In fact, they're going to leave Houston and never come back.
They're how old?
Well, I'm not going to tell you, 'cause I'll tell you how old I am. But they're you know, they're grown-ups.
In what, 20s or?
Yeah, and they're
so
going to.
So you put the 20-year-olds in charge right now.
Yeah, well, what I would do is I maybe not immediately, but I do think that we should be listening to younger people a lot because they're the ones that are going to lead. And I think they have a really much more clear view on sustainability.
Are they going to stay here?
Well, one lives in Austin, and the other one is at Baylor College of Medicine and swears she's moving to Boston. So that's not encouraging. By the way, to this point, and I have to say this because I'm also the chairman of one of the second largest software company in the Houston region, and I helped build that company. And most people don't know about this either because it's a substantial global private company. And I got to tell you, you know, and we have people all over the world, increasingly, and this is really scary. In fact, just at the last board meeting, we were sitting at, you know, this is where it's real practical, right? And here was the conversation. This is exactly the conversation. It was this. We have right now about 100 people that we're trying to hire for technically related jobs. Very good paying jobs, by the way. Problem is, we kept thinking, well, how do we get these people to come to Houston? And our recruitment rate for high quality superstars coming out of Stanford and, you know, and Princeton or wherever, it was miserably low. It just terrible. And if they were already here, the oil companies were willing to pay incredible amounts of money to keep them. All right? And so we don't know what to do. So what do? Well, we got to do it. So what we've done is we've invested heavily into our virtual systems and our methodologies for having talent wherever the hell they want to be. And so guess what? Increasingly, we have a headquartered company here, but we got people eating potato chips sitting in their basements in Portland, Oregon, you know, who work for us, you know, or they, you know. And so this issue of creating and everyone's talked about this, creating a superb quality of life, which begins with sustainability. That's the categorical imperative that should drive what we're thinking about. That sustainability in that sense of community And then we've got a branding problem. We've got to get out and tell our story better so that when companies like mine want to recruit talent, which is what we need, they'll come here. And they aren't, it's very difficult to get them to come here. And that's the bloody damn truth. And I wish it wasn't, but I think about that. So I don't know about who's going to be the leader, but I worry about these issues.
Yeah, that's, I've had exactly the same experience in building companies.
Same here.
If you're trying to find a recruit, if they have a Texas connection, you can get them.
Right.
Okay? Or if their spouse has a Texas connection, you can get them. But if not,
Good luck.
you might want to think twice about buying the plane ticket to bring them down to interview it. Because
Your recruit rate's terrible.
It's just, your hit rate is really, it's in the low single digits. And I have bought a lot of plane tickets.
Me too.
Over the years for these folks who just,
They won't do it.
they won't move.
And yet, Laura, you came here
I did.
from San Francisco.
Laura, is that some
think
indictment of your intelligence? No.
Well, the thing is, I
paradox
did
is
have
we-
a spouse connection, though,
Yeah.
so I
The
guess
paradox
it,
is we're creating the opportunities, okay? And we just gotta create the conditions so that people wanna,
Be here.
hook
right. I mean, it's true. I mean, I had never been to Houston, until, I don't know, a few years ago, and I thought, oh, God, I can't believe this conference I have to go to is in Houston. I would never have gone to Houston unless this conference didn't happen to be there. But once you're here, you do, I mean, I think Houston's strength is in people. People are extremely warm and friendly, and I think they're very genuine and passionate. But we do have, I remember the drive from the airport. I was like, I just couldn't believe the city. I mean, it took 45 minutes, and it felt like I was just on a concrete freeway with like strip malls off the side for
That's what you were
forever.
in. That's what you were
And I
in.
just thought, this is not good, And it wasn't until you get into Montrose and, downtown was, of course, is beautiful and more and more beautiful, and some of these neighborhoods that you start to see its beauty. But I sort of disagree. Because everyone I have heard, I've heard this like 1,000 times. We need to tell our story better. I actually don't think we need to tell our story better. I think we need to do things to the city to improve it, and then the story will be told. Because we don't, we don't. I can tell the story all day, and you still kind of are left with, I don't know, where is that small neighborhood? Where is that neighborhood I can actually walk
Laura,
on the sidewalk?
I agree with you, by the way. I just want you to know, I agree with you
Yeah, I
about
know,
that.
and the Bayou Greenway, I can't wait for those things to be built, because again, we're doing stuff to make the city
Right.
more livable. I can't wait for, more parks. I can't wait for more bike share. I can't wait for more restaurants that are fantastic, like Bobby's Restaurants. That is what is gonna put Houston on the map.
I agree.
And we are headed in that direction, but it is definitely not easy.
Okay, we've got about 5 minutes. Let's take some questions from the audience.
I agree with you.
Wrap up. This gentleman in the far back had his hand up first.
I moved to Houston in 1999. I was born here and I had the exact same sort of Houston kind of response. But I have lived in Washington, D.C., Boston, and New York City, and Cleveland. And absolutely every single one of those places, I would not move to them for a nanosecond. I would prefer here almost every single time. You had the exact same problems in all those major areas, and in some cases compounded. Crappy politics, crappy neighborhoods, crappy drives from the airport into this major city. What many of them do have, though, is a vastly how should we say, overrated, superior attitude about their metropolitan area. And we don't. Every time we get in a gathering like this, we talk about what a crappy city we live in. And to tell you the truth, I would not move any place from here. The people here are far better. I can't imagine a metropolitan area in the United States doing what we did with Katrina. I just can't see that happening anywhere.
That's great.
I mean, the city just
great.
opened up and said, y'all come on in.
I think,
We
yeah.
have problems and we got our noses in them. But, the fact that we have this enormous engineering capacity means that we have a lot of potential, a lot of folks just plain aren't going to have. So much of this is a matter of perception. Everybody thinks Boston is cool. Okay, it's not
Wonderful. Terrific. Who's next?
I want to say first that I really appreciate what all you people are doing. Every one of you has made great contributions. But the but is this, is that, as I understand it, the United States has the highest per capita carbon emissions in the world of any nation by a good spot. That Texas has the highest state of all our states. Harris County has the highest emissions per capita of any county in Texas. And the amplifying feedbacks in climate change are accelerating. So I don't see 20 years from now us burning a whole lot of carbon emissions. There's about 16,000 tons of food a day consumed in the Houston area. All of that has got to somehow get here without carbon emissions. So there's a major, major problems ahead. And so obviously all the things you're talking about are great, but the question is really the time frame we have to do something without having some really serious problems. And I don't think we know the answer to that exactly. But one thing I have looked at pretty carefully recently is this lunar power balloon issue. Now, I'm not a tech person in the sense that I really think tech's the way you solve things, particularly. But I think that it's economically and environmentally feasible, and it should be given a second look. And even if you did look at it once, you should look at it again.
Yeah, let me just take that. Look, I'm sorry. It's just there's plenty of energy on the Earth. Okay, we don't have a shortage of either wind or solar.
Hold on a second, but using that energy that's on the Earth releases carbon and heat into the atmosphere.
Well, wait.
The main issue there is distribution. And what you're talking about in the case of what they're talking about is essentially very close to free distribution system. Which is a huge problem and is also a 124-hour day stuff.
Yeah, but look, I understand. It's just not going to be, it's highly unlikely, let me put it this way, it's extremely unlikely that this is going to be a part of the solution in the time frames that we probably have, okay? Because you're talking about these feedback loops, right? Yeah. Okay, I'm very concerned about the damn feedback loops. And I'm not just worried about feedback loops, I'm worried about runaway situations, okay? That's what we've got to be, I mean, if you look at the IPCC reports, I mean, that's what you got to be worried about is uncontrolled runaway, okay? So that's what I worry about. And I don't think that talking about, moon-based or stuff on low Earth orbit or even geosynchronous is going to be in these time frames. That's what I'm trying to say. I think that what we really have to do is we have to deal with some of the kind of very practical things like Skelly's working on. I mean, look, to put a big transmission line from the larynx of America, where we have incredible amounts of wind, into the places where we need it, is like an act of God. I mean, you have to go through, he can tell you, hundreds of fights. And by the way, environmentally, and I'm an environmentally sensitive guy. I don't even I'm really, personally, I live that life. But we've got war going on, regulatory wars going on, that are creating enormous impediments on the Earth to dealing with these issues. He's got blood all over his back. I mean, my brother just got through having a $20 million fist fight, okay, over building a $750 million wind farm to supply hundreds of thousands of homes with clean energy into San Diego. And you know what the fight was over? It was because there were some Indian reservations out there, okay, who made all these outlandish claims about their ancestral burial things, but they never found a single one of them. But it took $20 million in 2 years of fighting when we're trying to build clean energy for our people. So we've got some regulatory issues, and in balancing out some of these groups that go and fight every single time, many times spurious fights, by the way, and you don't want to hear, a lot of people don't hear this, but there are a lot of spurious fights that are delaying our ability to respond and do the things that we need to do. So there's some practical things. You want to...
Well, we're a little off topic on your question, but
That's all right.
The issue is that with new types of energy, you need new regulatory paradigms, and you need a new set of rules. We have a set of rules that work well for the traditional, conventional way of doing things. But the new paradigm requires a lot more infrastructure. Right. It's going to have an impact, okay? But given the clear and present danger of climate change, I would argue it's worthwhile doing things in an expeditious fashion.
No question.
That is not a view taken by the opponents of James
Renewable
Brothers'
energy
project. Okay, they think that they're, the shards, or I think it was shards that they.
They never found any shards, but the idea of shards.
So the idea of shards was more important, and it really is a huge issue because it creates tremendous risk. And if you have to risk $20 million in a lawsuit, you think twice about
doing
an investment, and it drives up the cost of all the other stuff. But anyhow, we can have a longer discussion about that afterwards if folks like.
Okay, one more question right here in front. Yes, ma'am.
I think we agree that we have two problems, storing and distributing. So why don't we remove them? Why don't we not distribute and just make this building independent and fully sustainable, generating our own energy right here?
Yeah.
Right on the roof, right on the side, right on the grass. Why don't we focus on that?
Yeah.
Local solar. Wind won't work.
All right, so
Go ahead.
yeah. I'm a big believer in central station power, and I know that's not a particularly romantic view. I mean, a lot of people think, oh, okay, a chicken in every pot, a solar panel on every roof, etc. But it is dramatically less expensive if you do a whole bunch of solar fields in one place and then use the grid, which we already have, to get that power to where it needs to go. That's in the case of solar. So I'm not a big believer in putting solar panels on roofs. Sorry. And what you have going on right now, where you have tariffs in different parts of the country, we don't have it in Texas, but we have net metering where you pay just you get offset on the retail rate. Well, that's a big net transfer of wealth from rich people who want solar panels on the roof to poor people who can't afford them, and they end up paying for the grid. So I'm not a big believer in that. And then on the wind side, it's just so much less expensive to do very large projects in distant locations and then build the infrastructure.
With a better wind resource. I think it's hard to do wind in an urban area because the gusts of wind don't produce the kind of wind energy that you need, whereas when you have a steady stream and somewhere.
It's not smooth energy. It's not smooth wind.
Yeah.
But solar, we need both. We need both centralized power and we need the individual power that you're speaking of on every building. It has to be done. We design every one of our projects so that they can be fully powered by just having collectors on the roof. Where they put them on or not is up to them. And sometimes they don't want to pay the money for them. But we have to design for that potential. The problem is storage. We can do that, and we can have the power during the daytime, but the storage, the battery storage, is just not there. The technology for the storage is just not there like it should be.
Well, look, I spent, by the way, just so you know, since I am in about 12 months, I'll be producing 20 to 25% of the world's lithium for all the lithium-ion batteries. 25% of it that's in your pocket is going to come from my operations. And I spend a great deal of time working with primarily the major people that produce storage mainly in Japan and Korea, and which is where the highest level is going on. The good news is that there is a pretty good cost curve going on here as we expand the scale of large format batteries. I mean, you gotta understand, most batteries are very small format, but we're moving into a period where we have large format batteries that the costs are coming down really fast. And I think this is a very exciting opportunity, both for electric propulsion, like my car, which I love for y'all to come see, the Toyota Prius plug-in. It works great, okay? It's outside. Or, so I think we can make a lot less expensive, longer distance electric cars. And the good news is that at night, when you really need to charge them up, you can use wind that's off-peak, which is really, really helpful. But you got to have the transmission lines to do it.
Okay, James, thanks. How about a big round of applause for our panelists?